like the ship was sinking. That's what it felt like to me. And so I thought to myself, I have to drive this train. I have to be healthy enough in order to move myself and my kids through this. So I'm going to put myself first. I'm going to do things that make me feel good. And I am going to ask myself what makes me feel good. And I'm going to listen and tap into my gut and do that thing, however crazy that may sound, or whatever crazy thing. If I get goosebumps on my body, I'm going to do it.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Today, you'll be listening to a conversation that I'll be having right now with Melissa Pierce. And Melissa is the author, founder, and creator of Filled with Gold, which is a monthly self-care support boxes for widows. And she is going to be sharing her story of how she just became a widow overnight, from her husband, Dave, who passed away in 2011, and how she went from that to now creating this support for other women that, just like herself, have lost their husbands. You also have a podcast as well. So she also has a podcast. So we were actually talking about that just right before. So welcome, Melissa.
Well, thanks for having me, Kendra. I love your show and I appreciate being here.
Oh, grateful that you're here as well. Oh my gosh. And you have the best voice. You have the best like radio voice kind of thing too.
Oh my gosh. So my mom told me that. So I'm like, okay. But then somebody else told me that as well. So I'm like, okay, my mom has to say that. But somebody else did say that, yeah, I have a good voice for radio, so I'll take it.
Yeah. So there you go. That's why you can have the podcast as well, because you got a good voice. Yeah, because it has to be something that I guess people would be comfortable listening to. Like
Hmm.
if I had a really like,
Right.
something that it would be like harder for someone to maybe feel as engaged. I don't know. Maybe that's depending on the person that's listening. But anyway, so thank you for being on. And so tell us, where do you live? Let's just chat that party. We're talking Gulf Coast of Oregon.
Yes, I live in the northern coast of Oregon. So if you know where Portland is, I'm just like right across, about an hour and a half's drive, on the coast of Oregon. So, but I am from Portland. I am
Is it near Vancouver, Washington? Are
Port
you near
Portland's
Vancouver,
near
Washington?
Vancouver, Washington, but
Oh, okay.
where I live, it's called Manzanita, and it's a little tiny town. And so I remarried. I'm a remarried widow, and my husband in this life, his name is Sean. We during the pandemic, we decided to sell our home in Portland because all the kids are gone. We're empty nesters. We have this big house, and we're like, well, let's just quarantine at our favorite place. And so we decided to just move here temporarily, and we'll just see what happens.
And
We're
then you're
just
still
yeah,
there. And
yeah,
do you both work from home then? You
yeah.
have your podcast, you do your
Hmm.
Filled with Gold, and then he also works from
Yeah,
home.
he works from
Oh,
home remote.
perfect.
So yeah, it is kind of perfect. But it's funny, it's the
Di-
first time that
yeah.
he and I have ever been um just the two of us, because when we came into this marriage, I have two kids from my marriage with Dave, and he had three kids from his previous marriage. And so, we always had kids, and then my mom lived with us for a while. So it's like the first time in our lives, it's just us. It's been
Uh,
interesting. Yeah.
so so how young is the youngest then that of the children? That
21.
is this is the first time you guys are, oh,
Mhm.
okay. So
Yeah.
just like recently went
Mhm.
off to college and all that. Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now share then with us then about Dave and your how about how you met and a little bit about your life and um and then then a little bit about the day that you became a
Mhm.
widow and your process then, your the tools you used and so forth. So we'll kind of that will be the flow of the
Sure.
conversation. So you don't have to answer it all at
Yeah.
once. Just start with how did you meet Dave?
Oh, okay, so this is back I was trying to think the year. I think it was 93, which dates me a little bit, but, I was going to school, and Dave's sister, Nina, she was one of my classmates, and we became really good friends. And at the time, I needed a roommate, and her brother Dave needed a roommate. And I had met him once before. He was a musician, and I met him at one of his concerts. He played bass. And at the time, I was with a group of gals, and one of my friends, Sheila, she's like, had the long legs and the short mini skirt, just really, really beautiful, stunning person. And so Dave didn't even look at me. He did not even look at me when I first met him. He was like looking at my friend Sheila. I would tease him about that, but so back to the roommate thing. It's like, okay, I met him once, and he's kind of vetted by my friend Nina. I know he's not like a serial killer or anything like that. I hope not.
She's his He's her
Yeah,
brother. If anything, you'd go and tell her,
right.
like, who did you tell me to room with? You'd like blame it on her.
Right, right. So we ended up like becoming roommates. I was dating somebody else, and he was dating somebody else. So we just needed a roommate situation. But we ended up becoming really good friends, and I could see like who he was as a person, and also like some of his personal habits. Like he always put the toilet seat down. He always put the food away in the fridge and didn't let the mayonnaise didn't stay out all night. So he was just really courteous and kind, and he had a really great relationship with his family and his mom. And so he's just a good guy. He's just a really good guy. And but we were friends like for a couple years. And then I developed feelings for him, but I didn't want to mess up the friendship. And then later, as we talked about it, we were kind of going through the same thing at the same time, but we had such a great friendship. We didn't want to screw it up. So, but then one snowy evening, after a few beers, then, it got
Things
a,
changed. Things
yes,
changed. Things changed.
things changed. Um, and then there was a little angst after that, but we worked it out, and we got married in 2000. Yeah, so
So this is how many years after you guys had originally become roommates did you get married?
7 years. Yes,
Oh,
yes, but we did live
wow.
together, probably 97, those for 3 years, before we got married, we lived
As a
together.
couple,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
as a couple. Yeah, but you had already been living as
I
friends, so
know.
it's like you
So weird.
so
So
interesting.
weird.
But you know what? You said something so key that it was like you already knew all these things that a lot of times people want to know prior to meeting someone or to
Mhm,
marrying someone are these things like the toilet seat, the
mhm.
this. You already knew all
Right.
these things about him. So that is awesome that arrangement worked out. I hope you thanked Nina for that.
Yes, yes,
Nina, sorry,
yeah,
Nina, right? Nina.
yeah, totally, yeah, she's my sister-in-law now, so yes, she's part of
Yeah.
the story.
Oh, that
Yeah,
is part of the
yeah,
story. That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, so then tell us about your children, and then where did you get? Did you guys live in Portland
We
then?
lived in like a suburb of Portland, but yeah, in the
Okay.
Portland area, and Dave taught, math at one of the local high schools, so he was a teacher, and then I was a paralegal, so working for a company in Portland. And like around my dad was very sick actually from 99 until 2003, his death. And so we as a family like spent a lot of time with my dad, like taking care of him. And during that time we were like, hey, we should think about having kids. Or like I was in my 30s, he was in his 30s as well, kind of the tick-tock biological clock there. But there's a lot of focus on my dad and his health. And then he
Mm.
died of a brain tumor in 2003. And after that time, we're like, okay, let's get this kid thing going. And we had fertility issues and did a lot of testing and some other things to try and have kids. and we just weren't able to do it. I was not able to get pregnant. So we were thinking, well, what is it that we want? We want a family. What is that? What do we want that to look like?
Okay.
And so we decided we wanted to adopt older children. And
Oh,
we eventually we ended up adopting our two kids from the Oregon foster care system. And they were 5 and 7 at the time, and they're brothers, two
I was gonna
brothers.
ask you.
Yeah.
Siblings. Oh.
So they're 5 and 7. So this is back in 2005. So
So you became parents of a 5 and 7-year-old overnight,
overnight.
just like that.
Yeah, it was
What?
crazy. I mean, there's a lot that
That in itself is that in itself. Can we make sure to bookmark that we can totally dive into that process, even just that as a
oh,
podcast, because
yeah.
that I'm sure is a huge transition and life transition just right there. So
Yeah.
okay, go
Well,
ahead.
when I
I
wrote my
I
book, my book is it's called Filled with Gold, a widow's story, but the very first story, uh-oh,
yeah, your
it
image
looks
froze,
like
but I can
we're
still hear you.
yeah, okay.
I
All
can
right.
still
Um
hear you. It's just the image. Mhm.
and I can see you now. I think I'm moving around. Um so the very first page of that book starts at the day I met my kids. And so it's not a linear story. It bebops around, but that's the beginning of my story, I feel like. Because I don't really remember life before that. It's really crazy, like once you have kids.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so and it wasn't supposed to be overnight. We had done a lot of work like getting, FBI checked and background checked and fingerprinted and trained. And we had to go through counseling and all these great things to make sure that you can handle challenging kids because these kids have been through a lot of trauma. And so we did all this, it was 3 or 4 months of just intensive work. And when we were supposed to have like a transition plan, like we were supposed to meet the kids on a Sunday afternoon and then transition them into our home. Take about 3 weeks is what they said. The slow transition. And
Mhm.
we met them on a Sunday, and they wanted to come home with us and meet our dog, Buddy, because they're just like, we heard you had a dog. If we want to meet your dog. So we talked to their foster parents and we said, yeah, is that okay? And they're like, sure. Because we were already certified foster parents at that time. So we took them home and they didn't want to leave. So we took them home that night and they didn't leave our house. Like we were not ready. Like we did not have like kid food. We didn't have
Oh
toothbrushes,
my goodness.
but
So they just like
yeah.
bonded. So Buddy is
Hmm.
responsible for them coming
Yes.
overnight and not leaving.
Yes. Well, my youngest in his profile, when he was interviewed by one of the social workers, he said all he wanted was a mom and a dad and a dog to lick his face. And so I'm like, I totally melted when I read that. And so when they met Buddy, yeah, he was the glue. He solidified the deal.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that brought tears to
Yeah.
my eyes and a dog to lick his face.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Like the idea of a family included that of a dog for him too. That happiness
Yeah.
and that joy included
Mhm.
that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So now they're grown.
Yeah.
Now they're grown
They're
and out
grown.
of the
It's
home.
crazy. But
Wow.
that whole time was just
That's
nuts because I hadn't arranged to take time off work. I didn't have any cereal. Like I remember like going that evening, we put them to bed. We did have beds for them. We put them to bed and then I ran to the store and got like Trix cereal and toothbrushes and kid toothpaste and all that stuff. And yeah, it was just crazy. So that just started that whole whirlwind of boom, I'm a mom overnight. Yeah.
okay. This is not like bringing a goldfish home and then
No.
figuring out what to do. These are 2 children. The,
Yeah, pretty
'cause
nuts.
that's like, wow. Now the other foster parents were like, were they okay with you guys already transitioning that early on for you guys to take
Yeah, well,
over
the
at
next
that
day we
point?
had to contact our caseworker and tell them everything that went on. But at this
Oh,
point, it was like we were already certified. It was happening. Like we were already, the judge had already,
in the
chosen
process, yes.
us. Um, so we just had to work some stuff out and sign papers and all that stuff. But it was really about their welfare, the kids' welfare, and what
Yes.
they wanted, and if they felt comfortable there, then they should be there with us. So
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome news. And okay, so then take us then fast forward to then 2011. What was your life then? And um what happened then that you became a widow
yeah.
overnight?
So we were living in Portland at the time, but a couple years later, Dave, like I mentioned, he was a teacher, but he was trained as a music educator, and he had an opportunity to take a job teaching K through 12 music in Eastern Oregon, which is like 4.5 hours away drive. So we took that opportunity. He had family back there. He kind of grew up in that area. And we thought, well, this would be a great place to raise our kids in a smaller community. We have eyes on them. Dave would be on the same campus as them. He would be their teacher and their football coach and their baseball coach and all that stuff. And I was able to work remote at that time. So we picked up our stuff and we moved to Eastern Oregon. And that was hard for me because it was really remote and isolated for me. It was too small. And I was away
Mm.
from my friends and family, and I was working in my home, so I didn't really have an outlet. Normally you meet people on the job and friends that way. So that was difficult for me. But it was also,
How old were the boys then? How old were the
they
boys at that time?
were 7 and 9, I think, when we,
Oh, so just a couple
yeah,
of
just a
years
couple
later.
years later.
Yeah. And you had also so at this point then you had experienced then the grief of your father for how many years prior to that then?
That was about 4 years. Yeah.
Rough. 4 years. Then the
Hmm.
transition, which is a huge transition of becoming a mom, that in itself, there's grief
Right.
components of that because it's like you have your life of even as much as you wanted. I always tell people the fact of being a mom I love, but I know I grieved becoming a
Hmm.
mom because I had to grieve the person I was prior to as well being somewhat gone for
Right.
a while. I didn't see her for a few years
Right.
myself. So you had gone through that and then a move in which you were then farther from your other family members and so forth too. So that also played a part in probably you being feeling
Right.
sad. There's a grief component there
Yeah.
too, probably,
Yeah. Well,
right?
and the whole momming thing, when you become a mom overnight, it wasn't like I just took to it like a fish to water. It was really hard. I have nieces and nephews, and so I know what being around kids is like. But these kids had experienced a lot of trauma, and it's trauma that I had never experienced in my life. I had a pretty stable childhood, and they had certain behaviors and challenges, and I'd be thinking like, I should be able to handle this. Like, I'm a bad mom. I'm like, there was not a lot of
Oh, yeah.
like good
Oh, yeah.
talk happening up in
The
my
mommy
brain.
guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
That mommy guilt, I remember I did an event one time about that, like a in-home event. I invited some friends, and that was the topic. It's like, what is
Mhm.
up with this mommy guilt that we feel like we can't even doing the right thing? We still feel this guilt every
Yeah.
time. It's like in there, so I can understand that, like we never feel like we're doing
Mhm.
our best or doing the best that we can
Yeah.
be. So I can
Yeah, it
relate
was
to that.
terrible.
Wow, that
Like,
is a lot.
like they would melt down. They would have things would trigger them. I wouldn't understand what would trigger them. They couldn't really talk about. They would just maybe have memories
Hmm.
or a smell or something and be melting
Hmm.
down in the middle of Target. And I'd be like, "Oh my God." Like,
How do
"Oh,
I do this?
I'm
Yeah.
doing something wrong, or I should be able to manage this situation." And
Mm.
yeah, so I was really hard on myself. That's just kind of my standard MO, is being hard on myself. But when we were in Eastern Oregon, when it was stable, pardon me, and Dave was teaching them, and it was just things calmed down. It was kind of this calming. It was just the four of us. We were on 6 acres. We hung out together. We did all the camping, fishing, snow stuff. It was a small environment. It was just kind of a chill time for us to be together. And then in 2011 in January, my oldest son was in Portland on a field trip doing a Lego robotics event, and we had gone out to pizza, Dave and I and our youngest son with another family. It was a Friday night. Came back and Dave's like, "Gosh, I just don't feel that good. I feel like I'm coming down with a cold. My chest is kind of feel like my chest is congested." So I'm like, "Oh gosh, here's some Mucinex or here's some cough syrup or whatever." And he kissed me on the cheek and he's like, "I'm just gonna go to bed. I don't, I don't want to get you sick." So my youngest and I, we pulled out the sofa bed in the living room. We watched a movie. It was The A Team with Bradley Cooper. I remember things very vividly. Some things. And the next morning, it was around, I don't even know what time, but it was early. And so I let our dog out and I thought to myself, gosh, he should be up by now. And normally we would have slept together every night. We just my
Mhm.
youngest and I just fell asleep on the sofa bed. And I walk into our room and his leg is kind of out of the covers and it's like this really weird shade of like gray.
Mhm.
And I look at him, I mean, he something was wrong, and so I go over to him and I shake him, and he's cold, and I immediately just start screaming and doing CPR on him, and um, my youngest is then yelling from the living room, "Mom, mom, what's going on? What's going on?" I'm like, "Don't come back here! Don't come back here! Stay there." And I couldn't find my cell phone, and I but I realized I had a landline for my work, so I grabbed that. I called 911, and then they were telling me how to do CPR. I'm like, I know how to do it. I'm doing it. Nothing's happening. And um, then they ended up calling I mean, he was dead. We just determined that. And so they ended up contacting my brother in law who was in town, and he came up. And then it took a while for the paramedics to come up because we had an ice storm that previous night. So it was just me and my youngest son, and it was just like the worst thing. Like I had to tell him his dad died. He was 10 at the time. And then I just like crazy things. Like he was supposed to coach a basketball game that morning. So I thought, "Oh, I need to call the other coach so that he knows like why we're not going to be there." It's like just weird stuff that you do.
Yeah, like the things that you're like thinking like that's like the last thing I should
Right.
think of is contact like you, but at the same time you're still in that mode of oh, let me yeah,
Yeah.
the to-do list that you normally have
Yeah.
and so maybe I wonder if it's a mechanism of survival in those
Okay.
moments of like having some kind of a routine. Let me call this person to tell them that he's not going
Hmm.
to be, and let me now go ahead and cancel the credit cards, like
Yeah.
stuff that has nothing to do with the emotions. I wonder if that's part of that survival
Yeah,
mo.
for
I don't
sure,
know.
because it was like, "Oh, I don't wanna inconvenience
Mhm.
these people because Dave's not gonna be there," It
Yeah.
was like this weird thing, so I called the coach, I told him what happened, and he was also a good friend of ours, and then I'm like, "Oh, geez, I need to let my oldest know because, like, what if he gets a text or whatever?" And my brother and his family were already on their way to go get him because they were in Portland. So I tracked down the teacher that he was with and told him, and then I had to tell my oldest over the phone, and it's just it was just a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And so waiting
Mm,
for him to drive, the 4.5 hours over snowy roads with my brother and his family to get to me, and then the family shows up, and at that point I'm not remembering very much. Like I'll remember weird things like, oh,
mhm,
SpongeBob was on the TV, or so and so brought this dish, but other than that it's like really fuzzy, and I didn't sleep. I went probably
mhm,
48 hours and could not sleep, so after that.
mm. Oh wow, Alyssa. I'm just even thinking not only just of your own emotions during that time, but just the fact of now your children also like what they had
Hmm.
experienced prior to you guys, and now they were they went through this
Yeah.
other loss, trauma as well at a young age. I'm sure they're resilient, very resilient beings.
Yeah, I mean, so their birth father died of a
Mm,
due to drug addiction, and they were pulled away from the biological
mm,
family. They have two older siblings, and um, so there's that piece of it. So, and I was like, who loses two dads before the age of, you
mm,
know, 14? Because they were 10 and
mhm,
13 at the time. I'm like, how does that happen? Because there was always this thing in my mind that they were golden. Like at this point, this opportunity, their lives were going to be the best lives because we were all
mm,
together and they were safe and they were taken care of. And then this happened. You know, it was like, how does this does not work? I
mhm,
mean, this in my mind, this is not
mhm,
fair to them. You know,
mhm,
I'm an adult. I feel like I can manage my um not manage my emotions, but kind of maybe understand. But as a kid, like how do you come to grips with that? I don't know.
right. Yeah, no, that is a lot. And then the fact that then now only not only you then coming to grips with your own emotion and grief, but then the fact of also now helping them navigate
Hmm.
this grief again, and which has just a different layer of it too, associated with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
previous loss of their biological dad. So, tell us then how you felt then, and you're navigating your grief, and what tools did you use then to kind of keep afloat? Here you are in
Hmm.
Eastern Oregon, far from your family. Did you move? Did you
Yeah.
stay? Tell us a little bit how did you find that support in this
Yeah.
process?
Well, so yeah, like how did I deal with my grief? Well, I didn't. I
Mhm.
didn't for
No,
a
thank you
while.
for
Yeah.
saying that.
I mean, it
Yeah,
was
that is.
just too much, but you know, eventually I got to a place where I had to.
Mhm,
But right thereafter, because of the stress, I was having like my heart was skipping beats. So 2 days after Dave died, I had to go to the hospital and get an EKG and put on a heart monitor and all the kinds of tests, like for the next following weeks. And they just determined it's just a benign, sure, you know, it was probably cortisol and all the everything running through my coursing through my body. But that was because I thought, oh my God, I can't die. Like, I can't
mhm,
die.
mhm.
So I set up, you know, all the wills. I went about the business basically by not
Yes,
dealing with,
yes.
like, I didn't quite believe that he had died. So I just like, oh, okay, well, I'm
Mhm,
going to contact a lawyer and do all this stuff and set up all these things and stop his credit cards and pay off the bills. You know, I was just like business. And I was also working full time, but I ended up taking a stress leave basically for 5 weeks after he died. And at that time, we moved. The week after he died, we moved away from the mountain home and into the town where our kids went to school, which is about 15 miles away, and into a house that was not the best house. So then a week later, I moved to another house. It was just like, could you add any more on top of this? Um, but we lived there for 6 months because I wanted the kids to finish out the school year, and then I made the decision to move back to Portland where our support was. So we
mhm,
did that, and then at that point, it was becoming real that Dave actually was gone and he was not coming back, and he wasn't just on some weird long fishing trip, which I used to in my mind. It's like, oh, he's gonna walk through the door again, even though I saw his body and I performed CPR. And I don't know what my mind was doing. I'm sure it was protecting itself, but it was like,
mhm,
oh, that didn't happen. But I did start to realize that that was happening, and I was trying to soothe myself with and cope with um, not the best things like alcohol
mhm,
and
mhm,
just running away from my feelings and not talking very kindly to myself and just being really hard on myself. And it just was manifesting in just not good ways in my body. So I did seek the help of a grief counselor, which first time in my life. I've never been in therapy or anything like that, but I would everybody should go to therapy, I think.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
she just really made me helped me understand grief and everything that I was moving through, whether I thought I was crazy or it was not normal. Everything that I was moving through was normal for me. And it was a extremely stressful and lonely and overwhelming time for me to be a solo parent and and understand and like like I said, I've been very hard on myself. So I'd always think, well, I should be able to do everything. I should be able to work full time and pay the bills and help my kids with homework and help them through their grief. And
You wanted to be Wonder
yeah.
Woman,
Yeah,
Superwoman,
and
what
I couldn't keep the
Yeah.
plates spinning and I wasn't taking care of myself. I was not putting myself first as a priority. So at that point, I just made a huge decision because things were just like not going well. Like my kids, like the ship was sinking. That's what it felt like to me. And
Mm.
so I thought to myself, I have to drive this train. I have to be healthy enough in order to move myself and my kids through this. So I'm going to put myself first. I'm going to do things that make me feel good. And I am going to ask myself what makes me feel good. And I'm going to listen and tap into my gut and do that thing, however crazy that may sound, or whatever crazy thing. If I get goosebumps on my body, I'm going to do it. So if it's a book, if it's a lecture, if it's an event or somebody that I need to see, like do energy work on my body, I did a lot of body work, acupuncture, massages, pedicures, anything um, just to move that energy around and out of my body. And that's when things
Mm.
changed. And I mean, that's when I felt like whatever comes our way, I can deal with it. And I also quit my job at that point. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So what did you choose to do at that? If you quit without knowing what you were gonna do, or
I
because you
decided to go
yeah.
back to school because I thought, well, I want to be a nurse. I'll move from being a paralegal in the legal field to like I'm going to be a nurse. So I thought that's great.
To being a paramedic.
Yeah,
Paralegal, not a paramedic.
something. I just wanted to help people. Um, I don't know. That's
Mm.
kind of, I don't know. It's a value of mine. I guess I just wanted to do something that I thought was
Mhm.
helpful. So I decided to go back to school, which is great because I would be on the same schedule as my kids. We would have the same summer break, the same spring vacation, all that stuff. And I just figured I'll work it out. Things will work out, and because I just couldn't work full time and continue and raise my kids too. I had to really like focus on raising my
Mhm.
kids. So I did that, and I went to school, but then it just didn't really pan out to be, I just wasn't feeling the nursing thing. So those 2 years were great that uh, I was able to work or go to school, hang out with my kids, really be present with them, and also
Mm.
have time to take care of me. But eventually I did go back to work. But yeah, at that time, it's like, I need to,
It was like a
yeah,
sabbatical. You took like a sabbatical, really, like of a time to just really focus, and like you said, you had not even really dealt into the emotions of your grief, and this was this time that you just used to do that, to take care of you, to move the grief through you, any way that was possible, and to be more
yeah.
present with the kids, like
Yeah,
you
because I
said.
didn't like
That
emotions.
is
I didn't
wonderful.
like, or no emotions that I thought were negative, or I just didn't. It's like I don't want to feel that, and so I'd always push, 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 push
Mm.
that away, push that away.
I'm curious, did you push away your emotions after your dad passed away as well?
Um, I mean, I think I was
Do you know?
grieving because his was such a long illness. I think I was moving through all
Mhm.
my emotions along with my family at, at, as he is dying. And,
Mhm.
but for this, I just felt very alone. Like this is like my
Mhm.
dad dying was, well, my mom lost her husband. My
Your brother
yeah, my
lost his
brothers
dad.
and I lost their dad. The grandkids lost their, so
Mhm.
we kind of did it as a group. But this,
Mhm.
when Dave died, it felt very lonely and alone.
Just you.
And like
Mhm.
I didn't know anybody who was 44 who had two kids. There's not,
Mhm.
there weren't a lot of, I actually didn't know anybody until I started reaching out and trying to find resources and groups. But it was,
Did you find the Dougie
yes,
Center in Portland at that?
yes, that's
Yes.
how I
Okay.
took my kids to the Dougie Center. And
Dougie,
that's
yeah,
where
Dougie.
I actually found my grief counselor, was a recommendation from them. Great organization. I love
That's
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the organization that I'm a volunteer at here in the Texas area, a lot of the stuff is
Hmm.
mirrored on a lot of the resources that the Dougie
Yeah.
Center offers, and a lot of trainings
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah.
that too. So good that there are these type of organizations out there, but I think a lot of us
Yeah.
don't know, right, that they even exist. And I think it's partly again because one, we don't talk about it, and the other one, like somebody reached out to me this week saying, "Oh, my sister lost her mother-in-law. Like I think she may need like to talk to you or something." But it's like, how do I bring it up? Like, how do I tell someone that there is a resource without it being like offensive? So sometimes there are people that may know that there are resources out there but don't know how to even approach someone that's grieving in a way that is not how do you call that,
Intrusive,
um
kind of, or yeah.
intrusive, yeah, or yeah, like you're kind of yeah. So how did you find out then about the doggy center
Well,
then?
so because the boys were in foster care. Well, they were
School.
previous. They had actually gone to the Dougie Center before we adopted
Oh,
them.
when their dad
Yeah,
passed
and I
away.
knew about it. I
Okay.
think I can't remember. Maybe another family member told me about it because it's
Okay.
focused on helping kids
Mm-hmm.
through the loss of yeah, their
Through
grief.
grief. Mm-hmm.
So I had already kind of known about that, but it's great that it was in Portland. But I know
Okay.
that they have, even if you don't live in Portland, you can access all of their
Yes.
services.
It if anybody listening to this is like, you go to childrengrieve.org and you can see what organizations are offered in your area. That is one of the
Mhm.
ways you can find out if by chance it's a child that you've lost. That's one way. Not sorry, if you have children, if you have lost a member of your family and you need support for yourself and your children, that's one of the ways that you can go on. Okay, so now tell us, you start doing this, you go
Mhm.
back to work. When did the idea of writing a book come up? I don't, was it, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The writing the book, the creating your boxes for the subscription box? Tell
Okay.
us that part of this
Y-
chapter now. This is
Well,
so
the book
exciting to
came
hear.
first because, as I meet new people and I would just say, they would find out about my story and or I'd tell them, a little bit of my story. They'd be like, oh my God, you should write a book. Because I did have a lot of challenges with my oldest son, and that's in the book as well. A lot of
Mhm,
challenges, and I had to make some tough decisions around his care. But he's
mhm,
fantastic. But um,
mhm,
so I'm like, God, should I write a book? Well, I don't feel like I'm a writer, but I don't know. So I ended up getting some help from a good friend, and so she and I co-wrote the book together. But it was so cathartic just to write down what had transpired in my life, how I moved to a place of hope, and all
mm,
the things that kind of got me there, how I moved through it. And because at the time there was not a lot of books or resources out there for young widows who were solo parenting or widowhood. Like I went to my little local bookstore and there was like the grief section was like, I don't know, 10 inches long. I mean, it was really not a lot. So, um, they're just
I think my grief section's longer than that
right.
now for sure. All the books of other people I've interviewed.
Right. Yeah, it's more, I think there's more people writing about their experiences and self-publishing, publishing their works, which is
No,
amazing. But
yes.
at the time,
Yeah, it's become
yeah,
easier.
at
Yeah.
the time it was terrible. I'd be like in the middle of the night Googling just anything widow, young widow, help a young widow, anything. And I found a couple of organizations that I connected with that were amazing. Camp Widow. I don't know if you've heard of Camp Widow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I enter. This is the one
San
in.
Diego.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yeah, my friend Victoria, I think went to Camp
yeah.
Widow. Anyway,
That
yes,
was a
okay.
game changer for me. But I really wanted to write a book that I didn't have. You know, like it was, I wanted to write something for someone because I didn't have that. So I created an experience that I didn't
Mhm.
have. So I did that in 2017 and I remarried in 2015. I met this awesome, generous, loving man named Sean. And I think Dave had a hand in it. But yes,
Yes?
yeah.
How do you know? Please don't keep me
I don't know.
in suspense. I want to know, how did you feel he helped you in this journey? What did you feel was the guiding force to meet Sean, that you knew that Dave was beside you in
Well,
this?
a couple things. I saw a psychic, couple psychics, because
Uh-huh.
I really like. I wanted to know like how Dave died because it's he just died in his sleep. They don't. It's kind of undetermined. They
Mhm.
determined it was sleep apnea and respiratory illness, but that just didn't feel right to me. So I went to a couple psychics to just like,
Mhm.
hey, can you ask him if he comes through? Um,
Mhm.
if there was anything I could have done, because I always felt like maybe there was something I could have done, or
Mm. Or the fact that you didn't sleep
right,
next to, like, all these things
yeah,
you could have, would have, should
hmm,
have, all the things that come
yeah.
up. Mhm.
So and when he came in to the first psychic, I don't know if your listeners believe in all this, but I do.
It
Yeah,
doesn't matter. It's
yeah, it's
about
about
your
me.
story, and there's gonna be listeners that relate.
Yeah,
That's why I love interviewing people with different stories, because everybody will find something in that story that relates to them. It's not just
right.
one cookie cutter version of it. So please share. So when he came in the
Yeah,
first psychic.
he assured me that it was just it happened. There was nothing I could have done, and and I talk to Dave. I have a conversation with him all the time.
Yeah.
But he
Mm-hmm.
told the psychic through the psychic that um, I would meet somebody, and he chose him for me, and I would meet him the following summer, and that he would be an engineer. And like he gave like real specific things. And at this point, I was a year out, and I'm like, I am not ready for this. So whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm not even thinking about that. And I have it recorded. It's on a recording. And so about 6 months later, I decided, well, I'm young. I would like some companionship. And I wrote everything out on what I wanted in a partnership and in a new partner and how I wanted to feel. I wrote it down, like, I don't know, a list of 80 things, and I put it away in my desk drawer. And I'm like, okay, like, it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Message in
yeah,
the bottle. It's a message
yep,
in the drawer right
it's
there
right
waiting.
there. And I ended up meeting Sean. He was the first guy I ever dated. First, like, and I just
Mm,
knew Um, like that
mhm.
was and he's an engineer, he's a software engineer.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna
And
say.
we met in September right before summer ended, so I kinda went back to that
Mhm.
recording, I'm like, "Oh my god." Like, wow. Because I just ask Dave for stuff all the time. It's like, "Hey, it's your turn to
Mhm.
parent." I know, like, can
Yes.
you, like and like, just be with your kids, be with our kids. One of them's going through a rough
Mm,
time. Can you enter his heart and just be there? So I talk to him all
what
the
beautiful.
time, and Sean is incredibly confident, and he encourages me to talk about Dave. He wants to know more about Dave. We have pictures of him in our house. Like he's part of. I don't know. It's weird. It's hard to explain, but
Mhm.
yeah,
No, doesn't doesn't seem weird to
yeah,
me. You've heard other widows. You've heard of other widows'
hmm,
stories in your podcast, and I'm sure they've all
yeah,
shared that a lot of times that's the
yeah.
case, that their husbands, or even widowers that also, or their wives, still play a part in that dynamic. It's very different than if had been
Mhm.
a divorce or something that was like not ended
Yeah.
nice. It's it's very
Yeah, it's
different. So,
lovely. It's
well,
very
thank you.
lovely. Yeah.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you write the book in
Mhm.
2017, and then how did the idea of the, because you said, okay, the book was something that you wrote thinking of what can I give others
Mhm.
that I didn't have myself. Was that the idea then behind the boxes as well, the subscription? Let's give this experience to a woman that is going through this
Yeah.
pain. Was that kind of
Yes.
what it was
Yeah, it
behind?
totally was.
Yes.
I received have you heard of FabFitFun, that subscription box? Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I ordered one and then I forgot I ordered it, because it takes a while to get there. And this was last year and I was having like a really crummy day and I hear the knock on the door. I look down, there's this box, FabFitFun. And I take it and I open it up and my mood just changed. It's like, oh, look at all these cool things I get to like put on my face or take a bath with or, just really take care of myself. And self-care was huge for me in moving through my grief and being able
Mhm.
to trust my gut and tap into my intuition and just move forward. And I got to thinking, gosh, if that shifted my mood, just that box sitting on my doorstep, I would have loved to have received this every month when I was, moving through that, actively grieving and widowhood and parenting and not having 5 minutes for myself. It kind of forces you to prioritize yourself. So I
Mhm.
thought, huh, I know nothing about this, but I think I'm going to start a subscription box business for widows, supporting them with their self-care. So there's no excuses. You get this box, you have to open it up because you're curious. And there's lovely items in there. I've been trying to incorporate a book written by a widow, and I think in every box so far, I've had a book. Well, one I had a self care checklist which was pretty amazing. Then I have like other self care items, like something fun to eat, any like a bath thing, just anything that feels good and it encourages you to take care of yourself. And so,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, it's been quite a journey, like diving into something that I knew nothing about. Big learning curve, but I love it. I sent out shipments yesterday, and I just imagine whenever I, put everything in my car and take them to the post office, I just imagine them just shooting out, into the universe, ending up on somebody's doorstep, and changes them and says, "Hey, you get to take
Mm.
care of yourself. You get to prioritize yourself." And I love shopping for all the items, and I'm always thinking about just how exciting it would be for somebody to open this box up and just experience this love. And I also put in a lot of resources. This last box that I did, there's 4 items that were created by widows. So I'm really trying to
Mm.
push like widows helping widows. So the books are written by widows. There's
Wonderful.
a course, a widow survival guide course. There's um, just a soap, amazing, beautiful soap created by a widow, Marnie Henderson. So, yeah, I'd like to get to a point where everything in the box is that I curate is created by a widow.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is amazing. And you know what you mentioned before, that one of your values is that of like
Hmm.
service, right? Towards other, like, and so to, because that's why you were gonna even go into nursing and so forth before. So to know that you are still, being able to implement your value in this way because of the experience that you lived, and bringing that little bit of joy to someone's day, week,
Hmm.
however long it may last, even seconds of joy, that is even just enough when you've gone through so much pain. So, what a beautiful, beautiful uh, thing to do in that
Hmm.
cycle, that you've went through of your own life. So, share with us then, how can people contact you and how can they get their hands on your book? And I'll make sure to put the website on the show notes. But on your book and on the subscription boxes. Oh, I have
Yes.
a question with the subscription box. Can somebody gift somebody just one, like as
Yes.
a gift too, or
Yeah.
okay? So
Mhm.
share a little bit about.
Um, I was surprised that about half of the boxes that are ordered are gifts, which is amazing. I was thinking more that a widow would purchase it for herself because that's what I would have done. But it's so cool. I'm also having widows purchase it for other widows, their widow friends. Yes, so it could be a one-time box. I also have previous boxes from previous months that are at a lower cost point. So yeah, it's a great gift to purchase for somebody or to buy for yourself. Getting lots of great feedback, and it just I don't know, it just feels like that was such a horrible, horrible time in my life, and I
Mhm.
didn't move through it with a lot of grace and ease. Um, Not that it's easy, it could be easy or should be easy, but it could have been easier if I prioritized myself a little earlier than I did.
Mm.
So that's my goal. That's my mission is to just encourage other widows to, take care of themselves, and you will move through this. You'll move through this.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so it's filled with
.org.
gold
Mhm.
dot
Yes.
org.
Um,
Okay, filled with gold, and that's where they can find the
mhm.
subscription boxes, your book, and any other resources that you
Yes, I
may
also have a
post
link
are on
there
there.
to my podcast. I still,
And
because I don't have anything
of
else to do.
course,
I'm going to
every
start a podcast.
no, no, no. Let's do. How? When did you start your podcast?
I
When did you
started in
start it?
July, so yeah,
Of this
yes,
year of
of 2021.
2021.
Yeah, I don't.
So many of us started because mine's been also since the pandemic, since March
Mhm.
of 2020. I figured, well, people are home. It will be a good time to make sure that interview because they can't say they're not available because they're
Right. Yeah,
quarantined,
you don't have to show up in a studio anywhere. You do it,
Yeah, just
virtually.
hop on your
Yeah,
phone.
I love
Yeah.
stories. Stories really helped move me through because I would hear someone's story, maybe they're 2, 3 years out, 10 years out, and when I was early on in my widowhood experience, I'd be thinking to myself, well, if they can do it, I maybe I can get there. And so I that's
Hmm.
really important for me to so it's an interview style. It's like I always have a guest on. And it's also not necessarily widows, but somebody who could be an expert resource or a resource for widows to tap into, whether they have kids or not. So yeah, I like hearing stories. I like sharing stories. And I think that's really important that connects us and makes us feel not so alone.
Yeah, agreed. It's a little brings a little bit of that hope component that you were
Hmm.
talking about before that you held on to that as you went on, that a little bit of that
Hmm.
hope, and to hear someone that has been through something else is very different than just someone that's never experienced it telling you all the hallmark phrases that may come to their mind. As much as it's heartfelt, you know that it they don't truly
Right.
understand because they haven't really truly been
Yeah.
through something like this themselves. So yeah, you feeling that you have something to relate
Hmm.
to another human being in these stories is, I think,
Yeah.
important. So I think, no, I know, that's what I do too. So it's just sharing the story. So I appreciate you so much and for taking the time to sharing your story and for now giving someone else that little bit of hope as well as they're listening to yours. So
Oh,
thank you
thank
so much,
you,
Melissa.
Kendra.
Thank you.
I've really had a great time on this podcast and keep doing what you're doing. I love how you're showing up in the world. Yeah.
Hey, same,
Yeah.
same, same. And the name of the podcast is also the
Filled
same.
with Gold
I
Widow
have to listen.
podcast. Yeah.
Widow podcast.
Mm.
Okay. Perfect. Can I ask what the
Oh,
filled with
yeah.
gold, how did that come about? The word filled with
Yeah.
gold.
So the Japanese art of kintsugi. Okay.
Yes. That you fill up the something broken
Hmm.
and you make it more beautiful. And then with the little gold kind of, they normally painted with
Yeah.
gold leaf kind of
Yeah.
in the
Gold
between.
lacquer. So the
Oh,
piece where maybe
lacquer.
you would have tossed it or because it's broken, it's put together by the gold lacquer and it's a more beautiful. piece for being broken. So
Yes.
that imagery, I just got goosebumps. Okay, that imagery that imagery
Oh,
means a lot to me, and
beautiful.
so yeah, filled with gold. It's all over. Yeah,
Beautiful.
it just means, yeah, so much to me. Yeah.
Love it.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you for sharing that.
All
Thanks,
right.
Melissa.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.